My name is Matt Shaw, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's webinar on behalf of the BCO NextGen. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar on disability inclusive design, which we are very pleased to be delivering today in partnership with Motionspot. Motionspot are an award-winning inclusive design consultancy and one of the leading inclusive design businesses in the UK. Their mission is a powerful one: to improve lives by ensuring that the built environment is accessible and enjoyable for everyone. That mission sits very closely with the values of the BCO and with the responsibilities we all share as professionals shaping the built environment. We'll have time for questions at the end of the Motionspot presentation, so please do feel free to submit questions via the Q&A function as we go along. With that, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our speakers from Motionspot today, James and Vivian. Thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy the session. See you shortly.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you to BCO and the rest of the committee. As Matt said, we're here today to talk a little bit more about inclusive design. We have a number of slides that we're going to run through and share with you, hopefully with plenty of time, as Matt said, at the end for some questions. Yes, all about designing beautiful and accessible environments for all. There are a few things, I guess, that we want to get through, so we'll rattle through, and I'll actually introduce Viv myself. I'm James Taylor, co-founder at Motionspot, and Viv here is also one of our inclusive design consultants, and she will present far more on the technicals and some of the intrinsic nature of what we do as we go through the presentation. But we certainly hope to give a little bit of an overview into inclusive design, what we do here at Motionspot and the story behind us, some of the principles that Viv will cover, a few case studies, and then leave plenty of time for Q&A. So in terms of what we're hopefully looking to take away from today, or at least the audience looking to take away, are three core things. To understand the value of inclusive design, and who it benefits and why it's essential. To build a bit of confidence around applying inclusive design, and in our world that often revolves around best practice and really thinking about how we can implement inclusive design, and then take that away as members to use that in your day-to-day roles. So that's what we're looking to hopefully put across today. What is inclusive design? I think that's a very good place to start. And what we mean by inclusive design is removal of barriers. So we're really looking to create spaces and places that remove effort and separation. And that is for anybody, regardless of whatever their human characteristics are, so that they can participate equally, confidently, and independently in all the spaces and places that we design. In thinking, why do we do it? Well, we do it for a number of reasons. One reason is because it's the right thing to do, and including people creates environments that different people can thrive and reach their potentials. But we also don't forget that there are some commercial reasons why we design inclusively, and many of our clients are reaping the benefits of those. So some of the things there that really resonate are the fact that there are 70 to 80% of disabilities aren't visible. So often people think classic disability, possibly somebody in a wheelchair, as I am. But actually, there's far more to designing inclusively than just thinking about people who might use a wheelchair. My journey into inclusive design started 20 or so years ago. I founded the business 12 years ago with my colleague Ed Warner. It was through personal experience. I was living and working in London 20 years ago. I sustained a spinal cord injury, which after a long time in rehab, I came out to a world of work, travel, and general retail and interaction with other people that was very different, and I didn't think was particularly well suited to me. But also critically, it didn't look good. So we've always been about designing with and form in mind. So thinking about how we can create environments that really cater for everybody. And I think from a personal perspective, my journey has really been an interesting one because my start point was purely from a physical disability perspective in terms of getting in and out of spaces and places, but actually quickly become accustomed to the fact that there are so many more characteristics that people have that require access and inclusion, whether that's physical, cognitive, sensory disabilities, but also culture, faith, gender, any of the other things that we think about when we want to design inclusively. Um, in doing so, Ed and I quickly realised that actually we needed to create a team of experts in what we do. Many of our team are architects by background, but we also have product specialists and other occupational therapists and people who are experts in the built environment. And critically, also many of our team have lived experience, which we really think is central to designing well, is with people in mind and consulting and engaging with the people who are actually going to use the spaces and places. Where we see the biggest impact and possibly most relevant for today is the workplace, and that is where most of our work is centered. But we also cover a number of different areas that one can think of that really makes the experience that anybody could have going into any space or place inclusive. I guess one potentially interesting point also is our coverage within education. So schools and universities, we're more and more seeing that the next generation coming through are far more in tune to inclusive design and placing much greater emphasis on it. So a lot of our work in those educational settings is also moving forward into our work at the workplace. Many of these names will probably be familiar with some of you that work in the industry, but these are the sort of clients that we get to work with, and we're very proud of some of the work that we have been doing with them. Many of them London-based, UK-based, but some international businesses as well. Some of those clients will be developers, investors in property and spaces. Others will be what we call end user clients, so multinational global corporations that have offices throughout the world and want to ensure that their spaces and places are inclusively and thoughtfully designed. Just a quick run through some of the services that we provide. At the lighter touch, we do some audits and assessments, which really allows people for existing buildings to understand where they are in terms of doing well and where some of the gaps might be. So that feed into a bit of a roadmap for improving things. But then also we really follow the REBA stages in terms of design reviews and embedding inclusive design as early as possible in the stages of REBA, sort of 0 to 6 generally. But also we are very cognizant that buildings are only as good once they are in use as the people that operate and manage these buildings. So we spend a lot of time with management teams to ensure that the design features are well known and are thought about from a maintenance perspective as well. This really sings to everything that we think about here at Motionspot, and that is the intersectional nature of inclusive design. And when we are looking at any design, whether that be an audit or whether it be design reviews, we're really looking at all of these human characteristics. And I think most people will realize the applicability when we see things like this of how many people can benefit from better inclusive design. I would challenge most people to think of anybody within their employee network, friends, family, or people close to them that couldn't benefit from better inclusive design. So it's really thinking about how how we can best improve the lives of everybody. I'm now going to hand over to Viv, who's going to go through a little bit more of the design process that we go through.
Thanks so much, James. Let me just get my camera back on. Okay, so in terms of our approach, because as James said, we're designing to a wider range of characteristics beyond just physical disability, we've got a bit of an intersectional approach when it comes to looking at regulation and best practice. So those are the guidelines, the technical guidance when you're creating a design. We then overlay our specialist expertise and knowledge. So for example, across our team, we have people who specialize in neurodiversity. We started looking a bit deeper into things like how do you design workplaces for menstruation and menopause. So it's getting into those nuanced details that really make a difference when your building is in use. And then lastly, embedding lived experience throughout the entire process. So a significant part of my role is heading up user engagement within the company. So that's mobilizing panels or groups within organizations of people with lived experience to feed into the design. And this is invaluable because that's where you get insights that you don't find in technical standards and regulations. The smallest changes, which can have a big impact on the way someone uses a space from perspectives of neurodiversity or pregnancy and parenthood, thinking about how you'd move through the environment if you have intersectional characteristics as well, because we don't just put people in boxes. Sometimes we've got a range of multiple characteristics and experiences in one human. So we aim to hit that with lived experience panels and use engagement. When it comes to the standards and practice, it's the layered approach we use. So, of course, you've got the baseline regulations that you must meet to make sure your building is compliant. But what we aim to do is go above and beyond. And that's when we overlay things like how do you embed inclusive design in historic buildings? That can be quite a challenge, but it's something that is definitely feasible. Or specialist expertise, for example, PAS 6463 is all focused about neurodiversity within the built environment and what considerations need to be made there. So there's so many best practice guidance that we love to apply, things for like sporting facilities, specialist approach to changing places facilities. And these are those insights that help you cater to a broader range of users that sometimes minimum regulations miss. And I can give you an example of what this looks like in practice. So when you think of inclusive design principles, these are the things you want to always consider. Ultimately, it's about placing people at the heart of the process. So we design from a people first perspective, and that's why lived experience is so important to what we do and going above and beyond using best practice and not just minimum guidance. Acknowledging diversity and difference. So when it comes to celebrating diversity, what James said at the very beginning is we make an assumption that disability or inclusivity often regards to one particular group, but we know that this goes from physical to sensory to cognitive processing and information processing differences. So we want to really acknowledge the broadest range of experiences when we're designing. And that goes to a common point you make is no matter how much preparation you make, there's never going to be a single solution that works for everyone. So designing for choice and flexibility are essential. So in a single environment, you've got multiple things that can cater to different people. And lastly, it's got to be easy to use. I think the simpler, the better, because the worst thing is having a complex system with good intentions. Rather have something that's simple, easy to understand and implement. And I can give you a clear example of this is when we were designing doors, how a door open and closes, have simple latches and levers instead of twisty, turny, nitty gritty thumb locks. So it's making sure that things are intuitive for all users. There's a few principles to keep in your back pocket when you're thinking about inclusive design. So diversity and choice is one I just shared about, but you can go a bit broader, thinking about signage and wayfinding, intuitive journeys, making sure space is legible, instantly removes a lot of barriers. Lighting is a big one, especially in seasonal countries. When you go from darker to lighter seasons, how that impacts people, especially if you've got people who are sensitive to light changes, who may experience migraines or visual impairments that have light sensitivity. That's something that you want to consider. Ethnicity, faith, and culture is a big one. If you're designing for multiple cultures to come and operate within your building, what spaces need to be available. And we'll go into this a bit more in the next few slides where I give some visual examples. So the example here is when we're looking at entrances, I'll layer some of the principles we spoke about, easy to use, and people first. So the furthest left image, we've got a building here, very fancy, complicated facade. What it is that I'd ask you to do is see which one of these points might be the main entrance. So there are three possible points that it can be because you've got three doors with glazing. Now that can be very confusing and frustrating for a number of users. Where if you look at the buildings on the furthest right, it is incredibly obvious which one the main entrance is. It uses color, it uses shapes and all those different principles to make sure that people are guided. And in the top right corner, you've got even an illuminated arch to make it crystal clear where you need to go. When you think about neurodiversity as well and cognitive and sensory processing, the transitions between spaces matters tremendously. So within this building, it's something you'd see and you may not realize might be an issue for many people. But if we look at that weather mat, it is quite a dark color in contrast to the floor and the rest of the surroundings. Now, if you've got conditions such as dementia or experiencing any type of cognitive decline or even obscured vision, whether it's temporary or permanent, sudden flooring transitions can appear like a hole in the ground. And when you have a perception of falling, it almost increases your risks of tripping. So things like that we think about, or in the top right corner, when you've got mats with bright white stripping, as you move across it, it almost appears as if it's moving, and that creates visual disturbance. So it's these little details that aren't as costly to implement, but make a big difference. A great example is the RNIB. So they've got a beautiful reception, and I'll share some of the principles that are positive. So on the ceiling, you can see a number of slats. Those are acoustic panels to minimize echo and reverberation. An easy one that a lot of offices in particular can implement is inclusive receptions. Think of when someone's coming in, it's their first welcoming experience. So if you look at this building, you've got a higher desk and a lower desk. And the lower desk also has a knee recess for wheelchair users. So that's something you'd want to consider. In the right-hand side, you see that we've got a polar opposite of it. So this reception area is quite reflective and glossy, and that can be very overwhelming for a number of people. So it's just considering how you can make a calm experience from your first entry point into the building. And as we move through, you're thinking about navigation. So I think commonly we'll see that different floors have various colors or themes, but never think about why. And it's to make them distinguishable from each other. So using colors as well that are easily perceived by people who are colorblind is another consideration. And then the legibility of a space going on to iconography instead of just text alone to make sure you're not relying solely on visual information. And then you can see one of the middle images, you've got Braille. So incorporating tactile features where you can is also a big plus. So just getting on to the last few slides of examples. So when we speak about sensory processing, it's also important to have dedicated spaces for people to take breaks or recalibrate. So this is thinking about sensory rooms and quiet rooms, which really are just, I guess, acoustically insulated, calming environments for periods of overstimulation. Sensory-friendly environments also can go out into larger workspaces. So there are a lot of great examples we can see here. For example, the use of natural materials has a positive impact on neurodiversity, but also mental health, that connection to nature, having clearly identifiable colors. So if you look in all three pictures, there's a clear distinction between furniture, ceilings, walls, and that just improves your legibility of space and makes it so much easier to be in, but also choice in seating types. So you've got your conventional office chairs or a softer cushion surface or booths to manage your social stimulation throughout the day. And these are the things that when you have these in place, you'll be surprised at the beneficial impact it can have on productivity as well. Biophilia is always a plus, especially when we're indoors a lot of time in these colder seasons. So that connection to nature goes from materiality, but also just incorporating plants where you can. And lastly, when you think about sex and gender, a popular thing in like shared spaces, collaboration spaces is tiered seating, but we tend to avoid recommending this because if you've got people who are wearing skirts, it's just quite an uncomfortable experience when you've got to sit on the upper level. And it's also an exclusive form of seating because if you have reduced mobility, that just doesn't work for you. So if you're thinking about designing collaboration spaces, sex and gender can go beyond just considerations within restrooms, although we'd also recommend having a choice for like separate gender and all gender spaces as well. When it comes to faith and culture, it's quite common for multi-faith rooms to be present, but alongside multi-faith rooms, you'll see an example of an ablution facility here. And that simply is just a space for ritual washing before prayer. So a big thing is not just making sure that you have the provision, but making sure you have the correct provision to acknowledge and recognize a number of faiths. And including the smaller details like where am I going to put my shoes or my coat when I pray. So those aren't like the most innovative solutions, but they're the small things that make a difference to people using spaces on a daily basis. Um, and Life science is becoming quite an emerging field in offices as well. So when you've got shared office facilities with lab equipment, how do you make those inclusive? Especially because we know there's a higher number of neurodivergent people within these fields. What are we doing for them in these spaces? So on the right and left side, the good examples you see is that connection to nature. So while you may not be able to bring plants within a lab environment, you can provide views to plants outside. On the right-hand side, it's just visual contrast. So typically labs can have a very monochromatic design. Everything's one color, and that's not good for legibility of space, nor is it, fun to look at. So incorporating a bit of color, it just makes the environment feel more enjoyable, a space that you're happy to spend an extended period of time in, but also has benefit for visual clarity. And when it comes to toilet facilities, changing places are just such an impactful facility to incorporate. It goes beyond just your standard accessible bathroom, but incorporates places for people with more complex needs or people who will have carers assistance. And that typically involves like your height adjustable sink, an adult changing table, and a hoist to increase like mobility within the room. So changing placing facilities are always beneficial in areas of higher foot traffic. And lastly, when we speak about like inclusive design, James shared from his story, like how accessibility can be quite clinical in appearance. But what I'm going to show you is this exact same space, exact same room size, versus carefully considered inclusive design where it's functional, but it also looks and feels good. And that's what we're trying to provide for physical disabilities, but also the wider range of characteristics that we design for. So I'll move through these slides here for now so James can share a bit more about how it is that we implement this in teams. Landscapes as well, it's the same principles that you apply when you're moving through thinking about different characteristics here. But let's go on to how we can apply this in industry.
I think it's hopefully relevant for everybody on this call to have a bit of context and background about what is going on in our industry. And by our industry, I mean real estate, workplace, offices, but also inclusive design. And I think the central thing that people should probably be aware of is the inclusive design overlay to the REBA plan of work, which we co-authored along with REBA, which looks to instruct and inform people what they can do at different stages of the REBA process to think about inclusive design. So it's really trying to get people to think holistically about inclusive design, but also at the right stages for projects. It's also notable that several large institutions that we are working with and have worked with in the past are really starting to focus on inclusive design. So, for example, the Crown and Grosvenor launched the Inclusive Spaces and Places initiative, which is looking to improve the access and inclusion across central London estates, but also other big companies such as Landsec looking really to embed inclusive design principles within what we do. So we're really seeing a step change in what is going on in the industry. And I think it's probably sensible to assume at some point there might be some sort of benchmark, maybe not an accreditation, but something that really enables people to objectively look at spaces and places and say which are more inclusive than others, which will obviously have an impact on rental yields and residual value. When we talk about the REBA IDO, we do follow those REBA stages. So from 0 to 6 and 7. Stage 0 does seem early, and whilst we do many projects where we're more engaged at 2, 3, 4, if we can get involved at the strategy and briefing, that is really where some of the shaping of truly inclusive design can happen, and especially if at stage 2 we can implement what Viv does in terms of user groups and engagement, really get to the nuts and bolts of what is going to improve these spaces and places, and look to embed the inclusive design overlay in everything that we do, and we certainly would encourage all of you on the call to start thinking about how you might apply that principle of the REBA IDO in some of the work that you do day to day. A couple of examples that come to mind in terms of what we've achieved in the last 5 or 6 years, and I say we've achieved because it's the industry as well. And the British Council offices were very kind to award one of our projects up in Glasgow the Best of the Best award, and a lot of what went into the Barclays development up in Glasgow are all the elements that Viv has talked about in what we consider an inclusively designed environment going forward. I think, interestingly, at the start, I also mentioned that there's the commercial benefit of getting things right for attracting a diverse range of people into spaces and places, but also from a cost perspective, not having to do it later down the design or development process. So Barclays conducted a study on this specific campus that showed for every £1 spent on inclusive design at earlier stages, it was saving £100 in retrofits. Something that Viv touched on, which was that heritage properties, which are often graded and listed, can be challenging from an inclusive design and access perspective, but that's not to say that it's not possible. And some of the work that the Crown and Grosvenor are doing in central London, with 50 or with 500 of their heritage properties, is really looking to embed inclusive design in all of those premises, but also thinking about going forward how, when renovations and new tenants move in, how they can embed better principles going forward. Viv, I will hand back to you.
Sure thing. So as we close off our sharing session and get ready to dive into Q&A, it would just be good to kind of have some takeaways as to how you can use the information that we shared and what this might look like. So the principles that I shared, the examples of how to apply inclusive design to designs, consider them at all stages. And James said that stage zero in the Reba plan of work is quite early, but when you start thinking about it from the outset, it makes it easier to implement it later down the line. Next is encourage all team members to embed inclusive design principles. So you might want to signpost them to webinars like this to learn more about inclusive design so they know how to implement them. Next is raise the bar beyond minimum standards. So I share that we've got baseline building regulations, which are a good starting point, but there's a wide range, a kaleidoscope, a collection of amazing best practice that we can refer to go above and beyond and cater to beyond to just physical disabilities, to really considering the full human experience. Um, be rewarded and recognized for using it. It is definitely something worth celebrating once it is that you achieve it because it has an impact that continues to raise the bar for the entire industry that should be celebrated. And lastly, of course, engage in specialists. We're here to help. We love what we do. We love the outcomes that we're able to achieve when it comes to implementing inclusive design. So you know who we are now, so don't hesitate to come find us. With that being said, let's head on to questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Viv, and thank you, James, for your really insightful presentation. I attended your session last year at Arup's offices and was inspired by what you presented that day, and the run through today has just reinforced everything you said that day. So hopefully the members that are on today have found it really useful. So please do drop your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom on your screen. I'm gonna kick off with a couple while we let people type away. I'm sure you get asked about costs a lot. So my first question is, how do you typically respond when you're challenged by a client or a project team around cost uplift as a result of adding in your inclusive design aspects on projects?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I think there are a couple of things. One is to think longer term than just that initial cost, and I highlighted the cost of retrofits. So you sometimes need to think of it in terms of the cost of getting it wrong, and certainly that could be cost of not being able to retain and attract a diverse workforce that we all know creates better outcomes for businesses. So it's really trying to think more holistically and laterally than just thinking, well, that's going to cost me X amount, so I don't want to do it. So it's really thinking to the future and really trying to put that commercial hat on from a business revenue perspective going forward.
I'd also add on to that and share that inclusive design can be embedded into other parts of the project without any additional cost. So, for example, when you're designing a new build, you might have a wayfinding strategy. So, if you could embed inclusive design principles into your wayfinding strategy, which you're already mapping out from the beginning, that's a win with no extra cost, but an extra impact.
Yeah, that's interesting, and we've just had a question that's linked to that in a way. So I'll ask it now. How do you approach color in design when a particular client has a certain brand which may not go or align with inclusive fundamental inclusive design principles? Have you come across that scenario before?
Yeah, I have quite a bit. And to be honest, I think brand identity is important, especially if you're in a multi-tenanted building. It helps you distinguish which one is your office. But there are ways that you can play around with complementary colors to your brand that deliver, the requirements that we need to see. So a big one, I'll give a tangible example, is visual contrast between floors and walls. Now, if your brand is all like beige light palettes, you can't have your floors and walls looking the same because it becomes way harder for someone with reduced vision to understand the environment. So it's kind of me putting my design hat, saying where can we implement other aspects of your brand identity within the building without compromising on inclusivity and usability for your employees. I hope that answers your
Yeah,
question.
great. Thanks, Viv. This is a techie one, I'm sure. So hopefully, you know what this individual is referring to. It's from just landed. So should we be encouraging designs to follow the BS8 8300? But I've said that correctly. Instead of the Part M of the building regs. What's best practice?
Over to you, Viv, but in short, yes.
100%. Like before building regulations come from me, I will still say you've got to meet those recommendations, but we will encourage you to meet BS 300 simply because, like we said, it acknowledges a broader range of users. Even the technical measurements instead of spatial conventions are a bit more reflective of how people use environments. So like a doc M, approved document M bathroom versus a BS 300 bathroom will look different. One speaks about incorporating like colostomy shells or thinking about dignity within a space where others just focuses on physical accessibility. So if you want to go above and beyond, absolutely, BS 300 is the way to go.
And I think that's important that there are other elements that we also think about when we design inclusively, and that can be around fire and egress, not just allowing people to get into a building in an inclusive way, but also in the case of fire, exit as well. So there are those regulations, but if we can go above and beyond to really start embedding inclusive design into those regulations, but going above, I think we're hopefully getting to where we want to be.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So another cost related question here, which I think you've answered in part, James, in the previous response. But this is so you highlighted that Grosvenor, the Crown, and Landsec have now or are in the process of implementing their own inclusive design strategies, which is great to see. But there's a question here around clients that typically have smaller budgets and maybe are looking at turning around an asset short term. How do you tackle clients with a more short term vision that aren't like the likes of the Crown or Grosvenor that have a much longer term vision with their portfolio?
Yeah, we do a lot with clients that maybe don't have that sort of budget, and the approach that we tend to take is that there can be some quite quick wins that can be done and at little to no cost. And that will often start with more of an assessment. So looking at what is good and often there are things that are being done well, but also have a bit of a shopping list that there could be things that could be done at relatively quick time and over less of a cost. And then you develop a bit more of a roadmap for some of the more complex portfolios or estates. So I think we've yet to find many scenarios where even on limited budget, there's not something that can be done to better the environment from an inclusive design perspective. So yeah, I
Right.
think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So some tackle the easy wins first and foremost with those type of clients. Um, This is an interesting one. So you touched on listed buildings, which is a clear and obvious constraint, which is challenging to get around. But there are ways and means. But what other site conditions do you commonly come up against which create barriers to uh, inclusive design principles?
Really good question.
Mm.
And in my head, I'm rattling through the different types of projects. I guess the different ones for workplace, or if you're doing a residential scheme. So the one that comes to mind is when you've got a site boundary that overlaps with a bit of public realm. So it's kind of hard to distinguish who's going to go through the site at what time because you have, I guess, private people who have entitlement to the site versus the wider population who may not spend as much time there, but are moving through it. And then the question becomes, whose experience do you prioritize? Is it the general public or is it the people who are paying to be there all the time? And that I think in itself goes back to a bit of what James says about the quick wins and where can you have the biggest impact. So it's user experiences and it's not really site constraints. It's I would say more because I'm so focused on user engagement, it's usage conflict. So when you have to consider multiple considerations and characteristics and experiences at once, who do you prioritize? And
Hmm.
that's why we go on projects for so long because we workshop where we need to start and build that roadmap.
And touching back on heritage and graded specifically, I think we are acutely aware that not everything is possible, and we're not looking for a scenario where we put a ramp outside every building to enable access through the front door. Inclusive design is thinking more holistically than that, and sometimes good inclusive design principles can be mitigation and operational so that we can actually navigate what we are dealt with. And sometimes that cannot be changed, and therefore put into place steps that can be taken to reduce the impact of the built environment. So inclusive design is more nuanced, I think, than certain people sometimes think in terms of, well, I just can't get into a heritage or graded
Yeah.
listed property. People can have an inclusive experience if it's well thought about.
Great. Thank you both. Um, so touched, well, a lot of the focus has been around the design of a new space or a refurbished space. But there's a question here around consideration for the construction stage. Is that anything? Is that anything something that you have been involved with at Motionspot?
Viv, I'll let you take that. I think you've been on more construction sites than I have, and I know that there are some things that we look at.
Yeah, I think there are a few things like consideration. Construction stage has different elements. That one, you could even consider the impact of surrounding users whilst a building is being constructed. So, for example, if your scaffolding is too far out of the site boundary, then you yourself create a barrier for other people before your building even goes up. So it goes from that one. Or we can speak about the correspondence between design teams and the construction team to share why it's important that we've made these design decisions. So I think often you have construction teams who are really experienced and know how to deliver something in a way that saves costs and speeds up time, but it might have an impact on the inclusive design outcomes that we're making. So it's that those clear feedback loops and lines of communication, um, often bringing some of the construction team on the journey with you and letting them feed into the process too. So everyone's on board really
Mhm.
that's the big thing and making sure everyone and all partners delivering this building are on board with inclusive design.
Great. Thank you, Viv. Um, so, James, you mentioned in the intro to Motionspot that there are a number of architects or ex-architects within the business. So, there's obviously a lot of architectural focus, but we've got a question here on MEP, and if there is, what are the most important MEP building services elements to be considered to contribute towards inclusive design?
Viv, I think you'll be better placed on that one as well.
I think the first one that comes to mind is ventilation systems as well, because it's a common conversation between us and sustainability consultants because you have these systems designed to meet certain targets. And I guess your systems in the background have a big sensory impact because when we're thinking about temperature regulation, that is really important for a lot of neurodivergent people, and especially people going through menopause have an increased sensitivity to temperature changes at that time. So there could be different answers. There's never going to be one most important, but temperature regulation is the first one that comes to mind because on recent projects it's been a big conversation, like which areas will have centrally controlled temperatures and where can you have user controlled ones. That's the first one that I can think of.
Yeah. And from just speaking from personal experience and building apps and becoming more and more common in modern workplace, giving building users the ability to adjust lighting levels and temperature controls in their own space, I guess will go a long way to helping address those issues rather than it just being controlled centrally by a building management. So hopefully that can help change and improve those aspects. Okay, so next question I've got here. A debate in my company which has a lot of leasehold buildings, is how to create truly accessible multi-story buildings. Would you agree evacuation grade lifts so that employees are not limited to ground floor etc. And can work anywhere?
I think this touches on something that James shared earlier, that it's as much as the building design, but alongside the management of it, because every building will have like evacuation and safety strategies. And we have like personal safety and personal evacuation plans. So you have to think about how those can work alongside your building designs, especially if you've not designed this building from scratch. So I would like this is a bit of one of those answers where I can't give you the answer outright, but it's about, yeah, what design provisions do you have in place that can work alongside your strategies? If evacuation lifts are part of that strategy, great. But if you've got a leasehold building that doesn't have evacuation lifts, has multi-story access, and you still want people to be there, it really is quite an operational and safety strategy question.
I think there's an interesting point um, to sit alongside that is that it is a challenge, and we see it all the time. The border between public realm and landlord domain, and then to tenant domain as well, because we know that somebody's experience to their desk and the environment that they have in the office or workplace is intrinsic to all of those areas. It's how you get into the building. It's the landlord domain, but also the domain within the tenanted area. And often we will have tenants that might say, well, we're trying to do what we can in our area, but how do we encourage the landlord to have more inclusive spaces so that the journey our employees have is inclusive? Or in another scenario, we might have the landlords trying to do as much as they can, but they say, well, the tenants maybe just aren't, as engaged as we are in trying to create inclusive environments. So there are those pinch points, and I think there's no definitive answer how to manage that. But I guess what we're trying to do as an industry is to forward the case for inclusive design, and hopefully we can bring people with us on the journey to realise that it is important, that there are commercial and societal benefits from doing it.
Brilliant. Okay, so on that note, then, James, what as a takeaway for us all, I think it'd be really helpful to know what are the most common areas of inclusive design that, in your experience, are most commonly overlooked.
If I can speak from a personal perspective, it is often the entry into buildings. We firmly believe, and what we try to embed is that everybody enters the building in the same way. So often, for example, I might approach a building using a wheelchair, and I'm instructed to go around the side to a pass door, which from time to time might be not functioning, locked, or indeed require somebody else to operate it in order for me to get into a building. So from a personal perspective, I think it's really trying to think about that arrival experience that can make all the difference. So that would be my personal one. Viv, I don't know if you have any pet peeves when it comes to inclusive design and some of the challenges.
Really agree with you about having a single inclusive access because no one wants to be, I guess, othered from the minute they enter a building saying everyone goes here and then you go elsewhere. I think for me, because I'm so big on sensory processing and your experience of spaces in that way. It's like the non-visual, the non-text cues as to how you navigate a space. I think if people were to spend a bit more time thinking about intuitive navigation and layouts, like if I were to get somebody to move through this space without relying on signage, without reading a single thing, how can I encourage them to move from point A to B with the least friction? That would be amazing because on a human level, sometimes you don't want to talk to someone and ask for help when you're navigating a space. It's nice when you can find it on your own. So if people can encourage independent use a bit more, and I know that's a bit technical and detailed, I think that would be a big win.
Fantastic. I think we have answered all the questions that we've had through. So I think if there's no more, we're gonna wrap up a little bit early and give 8 minutes back to our uh, BCO members' days. So I'd just like to say thank you, James and Viv, for such an insightful presentation. We've really appreciated you sharing your experience and your practical perspective on inclusive design. And I think there's been a lot today that I'm sure everyone that's dialed in will take away and hopefully apply in their own projects and their own workplaces. So thank you as well to all the BCO members that have joined us this lunchtime. We've had a really good number of members join us this afternoon, so thank you. And yeah, there's one final point actually. James and Viv have sent us a feedback form which we're going to be circulating following the session. So please do take a couple of minutes to complete that. It will really help us with our future sessions and if we can get some feedback from you all. But I will wrap up there. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.